Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to This Explainer, where we're going to take a completely mind-bending journey exploring the absolute largest and smallest scales of physical reality. We are going to stretch our minds to the absolute limits of what is physically possible to measure. We'll be traveling from the mind-boggling superstructures of the deep cosmos all the way down to the tiny, fundamental building blocks of space and time itself.
But before we go hurtling off into the deep, dark cosmos or shrinking down into the quantum void, I want to ask you a somewhat provocative question. Are you the center of the universe? Now, obviously, I don't mean that in an egotistical way, but what's really fascinating is the profound mathematical truth that question actually hints at. Because, as we'll see today, mathematically speaking, humanity sits almost perfectly in the middle of the cosmic and quantum extremes.
Section 1. The Human Anchor. To actually grasp these unimaginable extremes, we really have to establish a baseline, and that baseline is the 1 to 2 meter scale of the human body. Astrophysicist Tom Murphy brilliantly illustrates why we need this anchor. He points out that our human brains just aren't built to intuitively grasp the vast scale of the universe. Honestly, even professional astrophysicists don't walk around with a deeply developed intuition for cosmic scales. Our direct comprehension is strictly limited to about 8 orders of magnitude. That's basically everything from a 1 millimeter grain of sand up to a 100-kilometer scale, like what you might see looking out from the top of a mountain. Outside of that tiny little window of direct experience, we're completely reliant on numbers and analogies to convey relative scales.
So let's think about what those baseline limits actually feel like. To put this into perspective, think about a single red blood cell inside your body. It's just 7 micrometers across. That tiny microscopic cell is as small to you as you are to the entire Tokyo metropolitan area. And that's a massive urban sprawl spanning over 160 kilometers. That massive difference right there, that is the absolute limit of what your brain can naturally process.
Moving on to Section 2. Zooming out to infinity.
Having established our human anchor, let's totally leave our comfort zone and leap exponentially into the cosmos. Starting from our home, the Earth, we jump to Jupiter. Jupiter is a gas giant 140,000 kilometers in diameter. It's massive. But Jupiter is completely dwarfed by the Sun, which is 10 times wider. And yet, even the Sun is just a mere speck compared to Sagittarius A star, the supermassive black hole sitting right at the center of our Milky Way galaxy. That thing is a staggering 14.5 billion times larger than you are. But here is a really crucial point to hold on to. The Sun, the undisputed boss of our solar system and the source of literally all energy that drives life on Earth, is almost exactly 1 billion times larger than a human being. I want you to remember that factor of a billion, because it's going to be very important later on. Now, as we start measuring distances beyond our solar system, we instantly start dealing with numbers that just break human brains. There's a brilliant Kurzgesagt quote that goes, "Space is just so large it is kind of mean." And I love that, because it perfectly captures that overwhelming sense of dread you might feel when you realize the distance to even the closest star to Earth, Alpha Centauri, is measured in the quadrillions of meters. A billion is already too much for us to really picture. And out here, everything basically just translates to a whole lot.
Section 3. The largest cosmic structures. Okay, let's enter the realm of the absolute largest things humanity has ever found. Take the Sloan Great Wall, for instance. It's a giant wall of galaxies discovered in 2003, and it stretches 1.38 billion light-years across. Then there's the huge LQG, which is this grouping of 73 quasars stretching 4 billion light-years, or the giant GRB ring, discovered by mapping gamma-ray bursts, sitting at 5.6 billion light-years. But at the very top, just completely dwarfing everything else, is the Hercules Corona Borealis Great Wall. It spans an incomprehensible 10 billion light-years.
10 billion light-years. Seriously, let the sheer weight of that number sink in. Discovered through gamma-ray burst mapping back in 2014, the Hercules Corona Borealis Great Wall is so unfathomably massive that its very existence is actually disputed by some scientists. And why is that? Well, because theoretical limits suggest that structures larger than 1.2 billion light-years literally shouldn't exist, according to the cosmological principle. That principle states the universe should be relatively uniform on a large scale. But this structure, it's almost 10 times that limit.
And that brings us to the absolute macro limit of our reality, the observable universe. measuring approximately 93 billion light-years in diameter. This is the spherical region comprising all matter that can physically be observed from Earth. Now, while the entire universe itself might actually be infinite, this 93 billion light-year bubble is the hard, physical limit of what light has had time to reach us. To put that in perspective, it's close to a billion human lengths across.
Take a deep breath. Section 4. Diving into the microscopic. All right, let's snap back to the human scale for a second. We just reached the ceiling of reality. Now it's time to plunge downward into the basement. Remember that factor of a billion I asked you to remember earlier? Well, this brilliantly illustrates our position in the universe. While the sun is exactly a billion times larger than us, if we look inward, a DNA strand, which is about 2 nanometers wide, is exactly a billion times smaller than us. So you are sitting right in the middle between the boss of the solar system and the boss of your own biology. How cool is that?
So let's trace our descent through this invisible world. We move past that 7-micrometer red blood cell, past the 2-nanometer DNA strand, and down to the hydrogen atom, which sits at roughly 53 picometers in radius. But we aren't stopping at the atom. We're going right into its core, down to the proton, which measures a tiny 0.85 femtometers.
1 quadrillion. That is a 1 followed by 15 zeros. A single proton at the heart of a hydrogen atom is almost exactly 1 quadrillion times smaller than a human being. Now, what's really fascinating here is just how incredibly empty the microscopic world actually is. If you scaled that single proton up so that it was your exact size, the hydrogen atom surrounding it would be taller than 12 Mount Everests. That shows you just how remarkably empty the inside of an atom really is. It is almost entirely empty space, held together by incredibly strong fundamental forces. But atoms and protons? They aren't the end of the line either. Eventually, we hit the absolute floor of physical reality, the Planck length. This is the smallest theorized length possible. Below this scale, the known laws of quantum mechanics and gravity just completely break down. Back in 1964, scientist C. Alden Mead determined that using our known laws, it's impossible to determine the position of an object to a precision smaller than this. It's the scale of strings in string theory. It's the scale where space-time itself is thought to become quantized into this sort of quantum foam.
The metric for the Planck length is 1.6 times 10 to the negative 35 meters. This is an absurdly tiny number. To get here, you have to go a quadrillion times smaller than a quadrillionth of a meter, and then you have to go another 100,000 times smaller than that.
If you are struggling to visualize that, and let's be honest, we all are, consider this. If a single atom was scaled up to be the size of the entire Earth, a Planck length would be smaller than a single atom on that Earth. In fact, it would be about the size of a proton. There are literally more Planck volumes inside a cubic meter than there are cubic meters in the entire known universe.
And here's the kicker. This isn't just some random, arbitrary number someone guessed. The Planck length is mathematically derived by combining 3 of the absolute most fundamental constants of our universe. The speed of light, which dictates the maximum speed of communication, the gravitational constant, which dictates the force of gravity, and the reduced Planck constant, which links a photon's energy to its frequency. By combining these 3 things, we find the exact mathematical point where gravity and quantum mechanics collide, and reality as we know it simply stops having meaning.
Which brings us to our final stop, Section 5, the center of everything. We've reached the absolute edges. Now let's bring our journey to its climax by uniting the macro and the micro back right where we started. Let's contrast these 2 absolute limits. On one side, we have the 93 billion light-year observable universe. On the other side, the 1.6 times 10 to the negative 35 meter Planck length. These represent the absolute ceiling and the absolute floor of physical reality as science currently understands it. And when you calculate the difference, spanning dozens and dozens of orders of magnitude,
You find out exactly where you sit. The human scale is almost mathematically dead center between the Planck length and the observable universe. You are as unimaginably large to the fundamental building blocks of reality as the entire cosmos is to you. So, knowing this incredible mathematical truth, I leave you with this final thought. Are you merely a speck of dust, or are you actually the perfect center of everything? Thank you so much for exploring the unimaginable scale of our reality with me today.